Hello, my beautiful seniors. I am coming to you from my screencaster to give you the lecture for today, Friday. As you go, please answer the questions. Make sure you submit that on Google Classroom, and that will be your credit for today. So we left off on this chart right here, and you can see up here at the top we have a few definitions. The first one is your total cost, and your total cost is the sum of the fixed and variable cost. So in other words, the fixed cost, if you recall, are the things we have to pay no matter if we're producing or we're not producing, no matter how many items we're producing. Our variable costs are things that can vary depending on how many we're producing. So fixed costs would be things like rent or the machines, that sort of thing. Variable costs would be things like fabric or filler and stuff like that. So our total cost is the sum of those two. We add the two together to get our total cost here in column 4. Our marginal cost right over here is the cost of producing an additional item. So you can see that our marginal costs start going down at a certain point and then back up again, depending on how much we're producing. And then finally, our profit over here in the last column is how much we make and what we get to keep. So it's our total revenue, that's how much you collect for selling the item, minus the total cost, how much it costs to make that item. So you can see, for example, here on this first row, if we're making 0 bean bags per hour, our fixed cost is $36. That remains consistent no matter what. Our variable cost is 0 since we're using no filler for our bean bags, no fabric. So our total cost is $36. Yet we get no profit or no revenue because we sold nothing, we made nothing, so our profit is negative $36. Your marginal revenue is right here, is the additional income for selling one more unit of good. So in other words, the price. So you can see in this chart, it remains consistent at $24. So in order to determine the best level of output, firms have to determine the output at which the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. So go ahead and take a look at that. And where is the marginal revenue equal to the marginal cost? This is question number 1. Okay, so hopefully you figured this out, that your marginal revenue, which is right here, and your marginal costs are equal right at this row right here, which is at 10. This is the best level of output for a firm to produce out. That's where they're going to make the most. Okay, so in order to set output, a few things need to be determined, okay? So look down here at the bottom for this question right here, because this is question number 2. Now what if bean bags are selling for $37 each? So this column now would become 37. Where should a firm produce to maximize revenue? So again, look for that place where your marginal cost is equal to the marginal revenue of 37. And that would be your answer for number 2. How many bean bags per hour should this firm cost to maximize its revenue? Question number 2 right here. Okay, hopefully you got it. It would be right here at the very last row, which is 12. Your marginal cost is 37 there, so our marginal revenue, if it matched it at 37, that would be the best place. Okay, what if a firm's not making money? Now the company has to decide, are they going to stay open or is it going to shut down? So when should it shut down? If its firm's total revenue is less than its total cost, should it close? In other words, if a beanbag sells for $24 or per item, yet a firm is only making $20 an item, should it close? It's really not so clear cut, even if you might think yes. Sometimes keeping a money losing factory open is actually the best decision. Why, do you ask? So if the price per item drops, then the firm should obviously drop production to profit maximizing levels. And we'll look back at this in a minute. So the revenue from this should be compared to the operating costs of the firm. So let's look back to that chart real quick. So take a look at this chart. Let's say now that beanbags cost $12 a piece. Okay, so your marginal revenue is $12. Question number 3 coming at you right here. If beanbags now, the marginal revenue is $12, at what level should the firm produce? Question number 3. If marginal revenue is $12 per beanbag, at what level should the firm produce? Remember, we're looking for that point where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. Okay, hopefully you found it, which is at 7 beanbags per hour. At this point, our marginal cost is $12, and that would then make it equal to the revenue. Okay, so as we saw back there at the chart, if the price per beanbag drops to $7, the firm will drop production to its profit maximizing level. So if we then use that example of 7, we drop down to 5 beanbags per hour to maximize a profit. And at that point, and I will go back and show you all this on the chart, let me just talk you through it first, okay? So at this level, the total revenue is $35. And weighing this against the firm's operating costs, the cost of operating the facility, this is the only variable cost. This is only the variable cost, sorry, not the fixed cost. So that's the operating cost is only oh, I flipped those. I realized I have an error. Here, let me fix this while I'm on the screen with y'all. So hold on. I apologize. 5 B's, maybe. This is only the fixed cost, not okay, sorry about that. So even though, so total revenue is 35, we weigh this against the firm's operating costs. This is a cost of operating the facility. Whether or not they're making beanbags, this is always there. So the fixed cost, not the variable cost. So it should still stay open because it's making more in revenue than the variable cost. And let me show you this, okay? Hold on. I feel like I have an error in here and I apologize for wasting your time. No, this was right in the first place. Sorry, let me fix this. I apologize. And I don't want to re-record this whole thing since I'm 6 minutes in, so you can deal with my errors. So I apologize. So let me explain this again. Meep, rewind. Okay, so if the price of beanbag drops to $7 per beanbag, the firm would then drop its production to profit maximizing levels. So at this point, the revenue is 35. So we would weigh this against the operating cost. So fixed costs, we have to pay that whether we're making 0 beanbags or 8 million beanbags. But our operating cost is only reliant on those variable costs, the fabric, the stuffing, the thread, those sorts of things. So if we're not making any beanbags, then what would that's our fixed cost. So we only look at the variable cost when talking about the operating cost because we're actually operating with that, if that makes sense. If we're not operating, we still have to pay the fixed cost. So our variable cost is only the operating cost. So if we weigh it against that, we see that the firm produces 5 beanbags, which is making $35 in revenue, which is still more than the $27 variable cost. Let me show you this on the chart, okay? So if it's making 5 beanbags per hour, the marginal cost is $7, okay? We are going to make, at this point, a profit still if we're making 5 beanbags, so 7 times 5 would be $35, which is still more than this variable cost of $27. We have to pay this $36 no matter what. So if you're looking at it and going, but what about the 36? Even if I'm making 0 beanbags per hour, I've got to pay the 36, right? But I could at least be making a little bit of money to pay for that variable cost at 35. Okay, so if I'm making 5 beanbags per hour at 7 beanbags for my price, then I'd be right here, and 7 times 5 is 35. So that's where my profit, or not really profit, but where it makes sense. I'm sorry, this is super confusing and it shouldn't be. So let me re-summarize this again. So if a price drops, then first of all, the production of that item should drop for the firm in order to make money so that it still operates at the profit maximizing levels. But if it becomes to a point where the profit maximizing level is questionable, so maybe the total revenue is not very much, we'd still tell the firm it shouldn't shut down, because as long as its operating costs, the cost of operating, just the variable cost, not the fixed cost, just the variable for the operating cost, if that is still less than its revenue, then it should stay open. Okay, so let me say that one more time. If the operating cost, which is equal to the variable cost, is less than the revenue, then the firm should stay open. Okay, really pay attention to this bottom bullet right here. So if the firm produces 5 beanbags making $35 in revenue, this is still more than the $27 variable cost, stay open. Okay, revenue greater than variable cost, stay open. Ooh, and look, I did it twice because apparently it's important 3 times. Okay, so continuing on this shutdown decision though. So if the firm shuts down the factory, it's not operating, it's not making any beanbags, it still must pay its fixed cost, even if its revenue is 0, which is why that previous scenario is still better than shutting down the factory. So if for the factory, the fixed cost is $36. So if it closes the factory, it would lose $36 per hour. So at least with that previous scenario, it's making a little bit. But depending on how long that price stays low or that moment that the revenue is less than the variable cost, a firm might consider shutting down. So it shouldn't always shut down immediately, but if it goes on too long or comes to the point that the revenue is less than the variable cost, it should consider shutting down. Okay. Last section for supply, changes in supply. What impacts it and how? So we're looking at what impacts supply and how does it impact it. The first thing that's going to impact supply are input costs. Remember that inputs are things that are used to produce an item. So if the cost of inputs arrive, we have some effects. So for example, if the fabric, thread, and dye for a garment factory, the cost of those goes up, then the marginal cost is going to increase. Again, don't overthink this, just think about this. If the fabric, thread, and dye at a garment factory cost more, then it's going to cost more for each and every garment that is produced. So, and if the cost of that input goes too high, it may cause the marginal cost to be higher than the sell price, cutting into the profit. So if it costs so much to get this thread that now the thread costs more than the t-shirt we're going to make with it, that's going to cut into our profit. And if this is the case and a firm has no control over the cost of the inputs, maybe this thread they get is super unique and they can only get it from one place, the only solution for that firm is to cut production so they can lower their marginal cost until it equals the lower price. In other words, let's say we have this super unique thread that's imported from some tiny little island off of South America, and that thread normally costs $1 a spool. That's like one of those little round things that thread is on, okay? And then suddenly and by the way, our t-shirts are known for this very particular and unique thread. But now suddenly that thread goes up to $10 a spool. But our t-shirts are only selling for $9 a spool. We're going to have to drop our production so that we can match that if we have no control over getting that input for cheaper. Another thing that can affect input cost is technology. So advancements in technology can lower production cost and increase supply at all levels. Mr. Bello and I were looking at this picture in the book and laughing because I had a picture of like a CD and like an old cell phone, not like a brick one, but a fairly, not even a flip phone sort of phone. And I forget what else. And we were laughing about how that's considered technology at the time that this book was published in 2007. And nowadays it would be very different. But as robots are replacing people, we can produce goods faster, more efficiently than ever before, which also we don't have to pay robots, and robots can work all night. So because of that, that means we can get inputs at cheaper prices than ever before. Another influence on supply is government, and there's a few ways the government can influence supply. The first one is in the form of subsidies. A subsidy is a government payment that supports a business or a market. So why is the government going to do this for a business or a market? There's a few reasons. The first one is to protect a certain lifestyle or the character of an area. So maybe the people in this area have always grown this particular crop, and we just think it's really great that they've grown it and it's part of our culture and we're very proud of it. So the government, excuse me, might step in to subsidize it or help keep their prices high so that they can stay in business. Another reason the government might step in is to ensure that there's enough of a certain